There's two really accounts in this, and certainly as we look at this in chapter 4, we see the prose. This is the narrative of the story that's going to happen. This is the narrative of Deborah and Barak and Jalel in what is happening. And then we see in chapter 5, we see the poetry that's written. And of course, our text in chapter 4 is how skillfully it's written, but chapter 5 really becomes the key to interpreting chapter 4. It becomes the linchpin, really, or it helps us understand what's going on in chapter 5 through the prose, through the praise that is continued to raise. Now let's get to, we've already talked about this a little bit, the setting. Is, and we'll go through this kind of quickly. After Ehud's death, we saw that Israel sins again, verse 1. They did evil in the sight of the Lord, verse 1. God sells Israel in the hand of Jabin, verse 2. We know that they have irons of chariot. They're now oppressed for about 20 years or so in that. And then look at, go over to chapter 5 real quick. Go over to chapter 5, and let's look at verses, someone read verses 6 to 8 for us. Chapter 5, verses 6 to 8.
In the days of Shamgar, the son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were unoccupied, and the travelers walked through byways. The inhabitants of the villages ceased. They ceased in Israel until that I, Deborah, arose, a mother in Israel. They chose new gods. Then was war in the gates. Was there a shield or spear seen among 40,000 in Israel?
Okay, good. So in that verses 6 to 8 there really supplies the background of where Israel was at the time of at this 20-year point of what essentially has gone on over this 20 years for us. And then, of course, we see that in verse 3, they cry out, and we then start to see what happens with it. And then go ahead and go to the next slide. Now we see Deborah and Barak here. Deborah was first introduced. We know in verse 5 she's a prophetess. And turn over to chapter 20, and let's look at, turn over to Judges chapter 20. Judges chapter 20. And look at verses 26 and 27. Yeah, just go ahead and read that for us.
Then the Israelites, all the people, went up to Bethel, and there they sat weeping before the Lord. They fasted that day until evening and presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings to the Lord. And the Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days the Ark of the Covenant of God was there.
Okay, good. Thank you. So we know that that during this time, this is where they're at. They're in Bethel, in that area. That's the only reason I wanted to read that passage, to get an idea of where we're at with it. Go ahead and go back to chapter 4 then. We'll start in verse 5 there. Where we're at. And of course, we see that in verse 5 is the cross-reference for that. And she sat under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramoth and Bethel in the mountains of Ephraim, where the children of Israel came up to her for judgment again. So they're in this, we know this area that they're in, and of course that's going to play out later on when they're coming back to be looking. Now look at this. In several different versions where it says she was judging, of course the ESV and the New King James uses the word judging, not leading as the NIV and the New English Translation use Israel, because there's a distinction there between what was going on. See, she's not leading anybody. She's not essentially like a king or a queen or something over Israel. That's the problem in the translations there when they're doing that, because what happens is we take that out of context then when we look at it, thinking that, well, she's leading Israel in some way. No, she's just simply judging. They're coming up to them with a problem, and she's judging that matter. It's not saying that she's actually out heading someplace or doing something with Israel, and so that's the kind of differentiation there we've got to see. And then, of course, she meets Barak, and of course we see what happens here with Barak and what goes on. We've kind of talked about that a little bit. Deborah then speaks God's command in verse 6 as the prophetess. God gives the number of troops and the names of the places for battle, assuring Barak's success. And see, this is the other thing that, it gets into me. God is already laying this out for Barak. He's already telling him, hey, you're going to have success and you're going to make it through this situation. And yet, when we get down to verse 8, where he says, listen, yeah, I'm not really going to go unless you go with me. I mean, the ultimate cop out there in terms of what should be, in terms of what his response should have been. Yahweh has already given him success. He's already promised this success to him. And yet Barak still doesn't see it. He doesn't understand it. Now, go down to verse, and this is kind of about where we left off last week. Look at verse 10. And Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh. He went up with the 10,000 under his command. And of course, we know that Deborah went with him. Then in verse 11, now Heber the Canaanite, the children of Hobo, the father-in-law of Moses, had separated himself from the Canaanites and pitched a tent there in Timbrith tree at Zermath, which is beside Kadesh. Now, here is where we're going to see the battle between Barak and Sisera. So look at verse 12. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Look at verse 12. And they reported to Sisera, and Barak the son of Abinon had gone up to Mount Tabor. So Sisera gathered all his chariots, 900 of iron, and all the people were with him from Hergash to the river Kadesh, or the river Kishon. So we see that is lured to this river, and as a result of this river, we see what's going to happen here. Look at verse 14 then. Then Deborah said to Barak, up for this is the day in which the Lord has delivered Sisera into your hand. Has not the Lord gone out before you? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men with him. And verse 15 then, and the Lord routed Sisera with all his chariots and his army with the edge of the sword before Barak, and Sisera aligned with his chariots and fled away by foot. Now that's important. That's important because of what's going to happen in the narrative later on. Because he obviously, Sisera is getting beat significantly. His army's confused. There's all kinds of things going on around him. He doesn't understand why he's got all this army and he's getting beat so bad, getting beat down so good. And because he's getting beaten now, he ends up running away, ends up going away as a result of it. And then go back and look at Judges chapter 5 again, and then we're going to look at verses 20 and 22. Those other verses there are just cross-reference for this. And then someone read verses 20 to 22 for me.
The stars fought from heaven, from their courses they fought against Sisera. The torrent of Kishon swept them away. The ancient torrent, the torrent Kishon, O my soul, march on with strength. Then the horse's hoofs beat from the dashing of his valiant steeds.
Okay. All right. You see what's going on here? Or you get the picture of what the poetry really is saying here? You probably could have sung that for us. And, go. There we go. You see what happens here? God has done something to intervene here in this scenario here. See, as the torrent of the Kishon swept them away. In other words, what happens here? God delivers them through the power of the river again. He rings them up and gets all their what? All their chariots are caught in the thing. That's then the horses' hooves pounding and gabbling their steeds. These are trying to get away from, because the water continues to rise. They want to get out of the situation that they're in, and so that's kind of what happens here. So we see that they're essentially taken out because of. I'm going to lose my place here. What happens there with at the bottom? So them coming down, Barak coming down at them now. It's easy for him just kind of swipe in and take them by the edge of the sword. Now go back to chapter 4 and go back to verse 16. So now we see that, so they're all trying to flee, they're trying to get away because of what's going on, and all of them fall but the edge of the sword, but Sisera. There wasn't a man left, everybody was gone, but Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as, and you got the word there, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword, not a man was left. Now look at verse 17. Because what happens here is that Sisera flees. He now has fled, and he ends up at this tent. And we kind of mentioned this last week when we kind of looked at him just personally when we talked about him a little bit about what he shouldn't have done here in this scenario here. But we see what's going to happen here as he goes. So he in verse 17, however, Sisera had fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber, the Canaanite. For there was peace between Jabin, the king of Hazor, and the house of Heber, the Canaanite. So what do we see here? He thinks what? Sisera thinks what? He's going to a place of safety. You know, he's at a level of comfort right now that he figures, hey, you know, my king Jabin and Heber here, the Canaanite, they're okay. You know, we're together. We get along with each other. Everything's going to be fine and dandy. Everything's going to be okay. I'm not going to have any problems at all. I'm going to be able to hide out here for a while. And I'm sure that's what's going through his mind right now, that everything is going to be okay. And then look at verse 18. Then Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, do not fear." And when he had turned aside with her into the tent, she covered him with a blanket. So what happens here? So Sisera thinks, man, hey, I'm ready to get in the lazy boy. I'm ready to lounge back a little bit. You know, I'm going to get my blankie on me. Everything's going to be okay. I'm going to be in a nice, safe place. It's going to be comfortable around me. Everything is simply going to be okay. You know, everything is going to be all right and stuff. Then look at verse 19. And then he said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." And so she opened up a jug of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. So he gets some warm, you know, he goes to the stove. No, don't go to the stove. Make some warm milk up for the guy. You know, give him a nice warm blankie and everything. And the guy's just comfortable, you know. He's just having a good day. He's in a place where he thinks is friendly. Everything's going all right. You know, I may have lost my whole army out there, but I'm going to be okay. You know, all my army's gone, but hey, listen, I'm okay. Everything's going to be all right. And then look at verse 20. And he said to her, "Stand at the door of the tent, and if any man comes and inquires you, say, 'Is there any man here?' You shall say no." So now he's giving her instructions to say, listen, just lie to anybody that comes. Don't tell anybody that I'm here. Don't let anybody know I'm here. Again, it's this level of security that he's at right now. It's where he is at. And then verse 21, then Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand and went softly to him. You know, now, the picture in my mind is that, you know, maybe she's just going over kind of tiptoeing. He doesn't want to wake him up. He's in the state of, you know, where he's kind of laid back a little bit. But so she took the hammer in her hand, and of course the tent peg in the other hand. And then, what's she do here? And drove the peg into his temple, and it went down into the ground. For he was fast asleep and weary. Now, see, if you know anything about investigations, this is pretty hard up here. I mean, seriously, it's really hard. And of course, we know what happens when blood comes out because you get a lot of blood from a head wound and all that kind of stuff. She drove this so deep into the guy's head that it went out into the ground. Man, she's using some force behind this.
She must have put it in this.
Probably right in the soft area there and went right down through the other side. Yeah. You know, she drove this puppy into him. You know, she made her point. Now, yeah, you know, yeah. I put that on. She drove the point home. I put that on the outline there. She drove the point home. She really did. That is, you know, go ahead.
Do you believe her motive was to save her family and self? Because if they would have found him there alive, they probably would have killed her and the rest
Yeah,
of the people.
yeah. Yeah, it very well could have been. I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously, God impacted her heart and her life, and there was an intersect there that brought it onto her to do this in order to save Israel. I mean, that's obviously what I think what the point of the whole story is in terms of it. So, you know, what her motive was at the time or what was going on in her head or all that kind of stuff, I think the point of the story is that this is how God delivered salvation to Israel. And ultimately, and we're going to get some questions to talk about that here in just a second, but you know, what Barak couldn't do without Deborah around, Jael was able to do and not have a problem doing it at the time. And so, you know, truly, I mean, when you look at it, God used this situation. And again, we'll talk about that here in a couple minutes because we'll get to the end of the things here in just a second. And then as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him and said to him, "Come, I will show you the man whom you seek." And he went into the tent where Sisera lay dead with the peg in his temple. And so Barak gets to see her handiwork. And then verse 23, so in the day God subdued Jabin, the king of Canaanite, in the presence of the children of Israel. And then verse 24, and the hand of the children of Israel grew stronger and stronger against Jabin, the king, until they had destroyed Jabin, the king of Canaanite. So again, that's what gave the power to that. So we see that Israel finally gets into the fight here. They finally get into a situation where they've got to do what they need to do. Jabin was subdued then, and Jabin gradually gets destroyed as time goes on here, and we finish out chapter 4. Go through to the next slide there. Okay, there we go. In a lot of ways, and the reason I put this up here, we mirror Israel a lot of times. We live in this state of falling into this cycle of sin in our own lives at times. And so we do that. And our tragedy is like Israel's are a result of forgetting that we are called to serve God and do what's right. You know, and really that's the most truthful statement that we can ever see out of any of these stories as we look at the Judges. That we are called to do the right thing. That we are the ones who we can't forget that we're here to serve God. That if we truly know Jesus Christ is our personal Savior, that we are here to serve God. And that's what we're here for. And when we forget that, and that we're to do the right thing, that a lot of times that's when we get drawn into sin. You know, as a believer, we get pulled into sin because we think, okay, well, you know, this situation's happening to me. I don't see God right now, and because I don't see God right now, there's that silence in my life. I'm then into sin, and then I'm into bondage, whatever that bondage may be, whatever that sin may be in your life that's going on at that point in time. And again, that could be any sin. I mean, regardless of how you look at it, it could be anything. And then as a result, we then cry out, and, you know, then we're finally at the altar saying, God, will you forgive me? You know, please bring me back into the fold, get me back into fellowship, and get back to the place where I'm at. And stuff. And we see what happens when Israel forgets to reveal the one God to all the nations. It falls into selfishness, apprehensiveness, blindness, and ends up dominated by idol worshiping and neighbors. You know, and again, you know, I'm stressing this as we continually go through this series in Judges, that we fall into the same kind of categories. It's easy for us to fall into selfishness. You know, we just saw that, or we'd seen that, or just saw that, or just heard that when we were going through 1 John. You know, we saw that it's easy for us to do that, fall into those threes, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and what's the last one? Pride of life. You know, I always forget that last one. You know, so the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, we all fall into those kind of things, and it's easy for us to do that. And then we fall into that selfishness, the apprehensiveness. God, where are you right now? I don't know where you're at. I don't see you working in my life. And just because you're not working directly in my life doesn't mean that you're not there. Doesn't mean that God's not there. You know, and then that blindness comes up with us. We get blinded by the fact that we don't sense God's presence anymore. And see, it's very easy to fall into that, and it's very quick to get into that. And then, of course, we ended up being dominated by idols and worshiping idols. And again, whatever that may be in our life, you know. In some cases, that can be pornography. In some cases, that can be cigarettes. That can be alcohol. I mean, just any number. It can be just simply, I'm watching too much TV. You know, all kinds of things that can go in our life that becomes idols to us. You know, and because mobile man, no, I'm just teasing. Mobile man's not an idol for me. Yeah, it kind of is, but anyhow, we won't talk about that right now. But anyhow, it's those kind of things that we look at, that we see when we fall into it, we don't understand where God is. And then, of course, I ask the question, and it really is a rhetorical question there for us, can you see the parallel in our lives? Can you see how easy it is for us to do that? And how easy it is for us to fall into those kind of things very quickly. And then just a couple thoughts here, just to kind of bring this back to where we are. I don't want to lose that. I need that. Yahweh who brings victory. We should not care which human instruments shine because of it. You know, one of the things, and, you know, I'll do a mark of confession here a little bit. You know, you're always, and it's our humanness, I think, a lot of times. You know, you see somebody in the church getting something that you didn't get, you know, or did something that you didn't do. You know, and so, you know, we start to envy that. We start to feel like, well, I should be getting that, or this should be happening to me too. You know, those kind of things. And God doesn't care who He uses. He's going to use human instruments, and we should not care who shines or who gets the glory from it. You know, because really it's not about getting the glory. It's about God continuing to move and work in each of our lives so that He can be glorified in everything that we do. And bottom line, that's it. You know, it's about God simply being glorified always. And it doesn't make any difference who gets the glory for that. You know, it doesn't really make any difference. And so we can sit there and think, well, boy, that guy got this, or that guy got that, or this brother got this, or this sister got that. It doesn't make any difference. If God's being glorified and it's being done for His glory because they've been led to do that, then it really doesn't care how that happens. So let me ask a couple questions here. How does Sisera's being done in by the woman display God's salvation? How does that display God's salvation? Go ahead, Bill.
I think He's going to use whoever is available.
Yeah.
It also fulfills different prophecies. You know, I kind of wonder if Barak thought that maybe Deborah was going to do it then.
Yeah.
But it turns out that another woman.
Yeah. Yeah, because she never says there that she's going to be the one doing it. But I wonder if that was, like you said, I wonder if that was in Barak's mind that, hey, that's what's going to happen and stuff.
Unless we think that it was unusual for Jael to be able to have the strength to do what she did. If she lived in a tent, she was probably nomadic.
Correct.
But she's no stranger to driving tent pegs.
Yeah.
I'm sure she
Yeah.
had the strength to do that.
Yeah, I'm sure she did too. I mean, you know, that's the thing. It wasn't like it was, you know, today where we're not out driving tent pegs to get our next home for the night or anything like that, where you're doing things. So we see that. And then the other question I got there real quick, is there a dilemma in the way God uses Jael to bring salvation to Israel? You see a dilemma in this?
Well, He prophesied it.
Okay.
He said this is the way it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And
He said he's going to use a woman. Deborah prophesied that he was going to use a woman to deal with it.
God can use anybody, and if he can't find a good man to do the job, he'll find a good woman.
Yeah. And what's the point? See, and here's the thing, and this is what, and the reason I ask that question is for kind of this, open this discussion, or open up this thought process that as we look at it. See, we want to believe that God is love, and God is love. And God is mercy, and God is mercy. You know, John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son that, you know, whoever believeth in him should have everlasting life. Okay, that you know, we see it at football games, we see it at other games. You know, man, that's who God is. But here's the balance we have to remember. God is also justice and righteousness, and that he is a holy God, and all of those things have to be satisfied. And so even though he says, what, thou shalt not kill, you know, but for his divine purpose, for what he's doing, his will has to be satisfied, and so what happens? He uses this as a way to lead Israel back and out of where they need to be at the time. So see, his justice and his mercy and those kind of things have to be met. And so God is going to use different ways and different scenarios to do that. And so as we look at that, and we have to remember that too. You know, we have to remember that in our own lives. God brings salvation in different ways to different people. You know, I'm not saying he's going to go out and kill somebody today. What I'm saying is that when we understand this, it brings a new sense that we understand that there's something just beyond simply God's love. You know, that there's other things that have to be satisfied in God's economy too. You know, the wrath and everything had to be on what? Had to be on Christ. You know, so that what? So that we could be sinful. So that we could live a sinless life. Sinless, meaning less than what it was in the past. You know, because all of that had to be met, and that was all met at the cross. You see? And then I kind of kept the slide up there from last week just as the so what. You know, am I willing to fight for the Lord? Am I willing to do those things for the Lord that he's called me to do? When he asks me to do something, am I willing to do that? Am I willing to step up to the plate and do what God has called me to do? And then am I stepping, it should be stepping out of my comfort zone or comfortable service to further God's kingdom? In other words, am I willing to do something more than what maybe I'd normally do to further God's kingdom? You know, and I think about this all the time because a lot of times, you know, some of us are not necessarily easy to talk to other people, and so as a result, because I'm not able to talk, I don't have a problem talking with other people, obviously, but some people do, and you understand that. Well, am I willing to get out of that comfort zone if I have a problem talking with other people and sharing my testimony with Christ, about Christ? You see, it's those kind of things. Am I willing to step out of that? And then I kept this up there from last week for this because Christianity is not a spectator sport. It requires kingdom involvement. It requires involvement in the kingdom advancement. I mean, that's what our mission statement is: to know Jesus and make him known. You know, we're to share our faith. We're to talk about our faith. It involves continually working to do what? To bring others in so that then we can disciple them so they get to know Christ. You know, Robert's now discipling Nicole and Danny, you know, and working through them. And we've got a book that they're using, and they're going through a lot of stuff to understand what the Christian faith is all about. You may not know this, Danny comes from a significantly Muslim background, even though he's not, you know, wearing beards and things like that. He comes from a significantly Muslim background or teachings under the Quran. And so he's got a lot of questions between what the Quran says and what the Bible says. And understanding that whole picture between why Allah is not the one true God. You know? And while they want to say, well, yeah, Allah is the one true God, he's not the one true God. You know? And so how we can work through that and how we can get through those things. And sometimes that does what? That requires our involvement in that. That requires Bill taking time out of his Sunday school class when Danny has a question, even though it gets off the lesson a little bit and gets out in the place where it is, to take time to go through that to get him. And I'm just using Danny as an example right now. I mean, but, you know, and there are other things that we have to do at times too. You know? Rosie taking time to spend time when Edna can't be here to be in the pantry, even though she's probably got other things to do in the day, to stay here with Margie so they can have a couple people here in the kitchen. or in their helping with the people coming in. You know, I mean, we can just go through about each one of us doing things like that, and it's important for us to understand that we've got to be involved in kingdom work. We've got to continue to be involved in kingdom work. Not so we can be saved, but so that we can live out our salvation in front of others. See, that's the important point, that it's not about us showing, hey, this is what I'm doing, you know, because I'm going to need it to be saved. No, it's so that we can show that we're truly living out our faith.